Roll call first. Trustee Johnson. Present. Trustee Court.
Here.
Trustee Thompson.
Here.
Trustee Owens.
Here.
Trustee Woods. Here. And I'm present. Next is the pledge of allegiance. I'd like to invite everybody to stand.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So are there any persons desiring to be heard?
There is none.
Next thing is any reports of elected officials or staff reports? Next is consent agenda, which encompasses the consideration of the minutes, February 20th. Consider the Fourth Amendment Development Agreement with Esther for a multi-family residential developer at 8725 on 43rd Street. Are there any questions, concerns, comments on the consent agenda? You all are here.
I move to accept the consent agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. One minute to new business. A, consider memorandum of understanding with Department of Transportation for driving access to 5960 West Brownville Road. You taking that time?
I'm gonna give it to Nate.
Sure. So, Trustee Booker and the rest of the board, we got a late update today from the developer who indicated that after all of our effort and all of this time, Starbucks has decided that the terms of the MOU and the terms by which the DOT would allow that right turn out onto Brownview Road were too onerous for them, and they do not want to accept those terms. They want to go back to a site plan where they would only have a right turn in. So we found out about that today.
Sorry, just to clarify, they had told us earlier, like 2 weeks ago, they accepted the terms.
Yes.
So after we had reached that compromise and finalized everything, this was kind of an audible that we were not expecting. So, okay.
Yeah, that's definitely correct, Tyler. We shared the agreement with them, and it run up the chain of command through the developer and Starbucks, but apparently somebody reviewed it further, and Starbucks came back and said it was untenable. And so at this point, we are recommending that the village take no action on this MOU, and then subsequently, there would be no amendment to the existing approved conditional use permit, which would be the second item on your agenda here. So all indications are that they will make a modification to their site plan, which we will review administratively, just to make sure that the driveway alignments match this right in only. And they will submit that as part of their permit to the state DOT as well. And then we anticipate that they would begin construction or demolition of the building within 30 to, well, probably 45 days. 30 days to close, and then 45 days probably to start mobilizing on demolition and construction at the site.
The tenants are out, they were in that building.
I'm not certain. They have agreed to buy out some of their leases, and we're intending to vacate the space. So I don't know if they have, but I think that they're definitely kind of aware of the situation at this point.
It will not be destroyed the bill.
Yeah. The cleaners is in there also.
Right. My understanding is that the cleaner intends to retire. The dentist office is moving to another practice, partnering with another practice, and then I believe there's one other tenant that is relocated. The driver education.
Nick,
Yes,
can I ask you a question? I mean, it's sort of moved now, right? So it's past the point, but the 3 accident deal breaker, is that an accident at the intersection or an accident on the property of Starbucks? Well, what was that?
it was associated with the driveway itself.
Okay,
So,
because that's our worst intersection in the village, so there are always.
Yeah, it wasn't-
accidents there.
it wasn't generally the intersection, it was the driveway itself. So if there was something that went to a private property on a public property, but within that zone of the driveway.
Seemed like an odd, part.
Well, and trustee Quirk, if I may, when we had talked about that concept at the DOT, I think it was mentioned that it was kind of gray to be able to prove that right in or the right out would be like the reason for the accident as well, because there's all sorts of reasons why an accident may occur. So I think when we had mentioned that there was, 3 accidents because of the right out, like we would have to look through a police report in order to try to determine if it was actually the engineering or the concept of the right out that created it. So, yeah, as you mentioned, it's a new point at this point, but yeah, there was some discussion at that meeting with DOT and the developer as far as ways to prove that. Which we did.
Anything else? So the A and B really kind of goes together. Because it's really going action.
They do no action on either item at this point. We're essentially, the conditional use permit stays as is, the MOU will not be put in place.
I guess we move on to item C, discuss financing options.
So I'll be happy to see this one up, and I'm anticipating this will be kind of our main discussion for tonight. First of all, I just want to thank Brad from Beard for attending our meeting. Certainly, I gave him the virtual option and he wanted to be here in person to help us out. As a reminder, Beard is our financial advisor. They take the lead in helping us with a lot of our debt management, as well as developing the pro formas with our TIDs to try to forecast the revenues and expenses related to each of those TIDs. So thank you to Brad for attending tonight. The best way to, I think, categorize tonight's discussion is in 2 buckets. The first bucket is I just want to outline how we got where we are today, and then just pause and see if any of the board has any questions. And as I'm done, Nate, Derek, or Brad, any of you want to chime in at any point, feel free to let me know. Once we get to that point, I then want to go into the options and just get the board's feedback. There's no formal action tonight. I think staff is just going to listen to your thoughts. There's going to be other opportunities that we can take formal action on this item later, whether it's through the actual 2024 budget or other things that are TID related. We can certainly revisit at this time, but I think right now we just want to do a further discussion and presentation on TID 4 and just get some of your thoughts. So TID 4, this was developed back in, if I'm doing my math right, 2005, right? So we're kind of halfway, just over halfway through the TID. Right now we are at a $5.5 million deficit for TID 4. One of the things I think that, and I just want to mention, this is something that there's a lot of factors and reasons for that. It wasn't any particular person or decision that created that deficit. So I just, for the sake of the discussion, I don't want that to be the center of the discussion. there's a lot of things that just occurred, and anytime you formulate and create a TID, there's risks involved. And I think with this TID, we've seen some of those risks come to fruition. And we're just at a point where we need to pause and reflect and consider how to move forward. One of the main reasons for the deficit of TID 4, though, that I want to present relates to the value. So when a municipality sets the tax rate, it kind of works backwards to get there. We try to determine it based on assessed valuations of the community, as well as the tax levy and what that would be established. And once we figure out those notions, we always kind of then work back into what the tax rate would be. Unfortunately for this TID, as we've seen on the residential side, valuations go up tremendously. On the commercial side, it's been reversed. And so because of all that and us lowering the tax rate, we have seen less increment generated, less revenue come out of TID 4. So that's one of the things that I just wanted to relay. We also made the commitment to streetscaping TID 4, which had some debt related costs related to TID 4. And obviously, we've made a great commitment working with developers to enhance the area. And, I don't know what the TID would look like if we hadn't made some of those improvements on some of the increments. But those are some of the expenses that you would see in TID 4. So with a deficit of 5.5 million, and knowing that we're about just over 10 years away from closing the TID, and I'll get to more details about that in a moment. I want to make sure that we start planning to try to stop the deficit as much as we can and plateau it. And there's certain ways, and I'll get to those options in a second. But as I mentioned during the audit presentation a month ago, we have to also keep in mind our fund balance. Our fund balance for the general fund is through 2021 is right at about 7.2 million. So we have made the policy decision of having that cover the deficit of TID 4, which is at about 5.5. So in other words, that's about 1.7 million that is unassigned. We have a financial policy that states that the village must have at least 15% of the general fund reserves in comparison to general fund expenditures. So through 2021, we're still compliant with that. But knowing some of the revenue shortages for 2022, for example, that's the marketplace assessment here, which we'll get to later tonight. There's potential that we may be outside of compliance. So that's something that we need to keep on our radar, and I wanted to make sure that you as a board are aware of. Now, the two good things when it comes to the general fund reserves that I think will help is one, through the 2023 budget adoption, we made the policy decision of moving court as a special revenue fund back to the general fund. And when it was as a special revenue fund, it had a fund balance of right around $500,000. So that comes with it. So that will be become a part of the general fund reserve. So that will help when it comes to our policy compliance. And then the other thing that we'll get into that a later discussion, but we'll start tonight is the ARPA funds. Through the CIP, we've allocated the ARPA funds to a few projects, but over time we've been able to, like with 10 Mile Park, we've been able to get the federal funding. And then I think we had some ARPA for the reallocated then to Village Pond. But there's some things that we could do with the ARPA funds where basically we identify as an incurred loss, and we could put the ARPA funds in our general fund balance. And that would be a tremendous help to remain compliant with our financial policies. So long story short, I think there's some options that we can remain compliant. But I just wanted to mention the relationship between the TID 4 deficit and our general fund reserve, so that when we go through the options, that understanding was there. So I just wanted to pause. That was like my 5-minute speech, kind of on, how we got to today, some of the factors that are contributing to TID 4. And before we move forward and answer any questions on this first discussion, the attachment B is really going to be a useful tool for you in understanding, where we're at today and where we will be at if there's no changes related to TID 4. If I could just take a moment to go through that pro forma with you. You can see in the green, that's a lot of the background data related to valuation and increment that's been generated. You'll see in section C, there's a bunch of increment through 2022. That was the Green Lake apartment construction that was realized, as well as the recent bedding sale. So those were things that added increment to TID 4. But you can kind of see the tax rate. I mean, the tax rate used to be over 30, and now we're down to 24.61. So that kind of shows you how that trend has impacted the width of the increment in this TID. And then you can see the computation of how revenues are collected for TID 4. Column H is the TID 3 to try to give some additional revenue for TID 4. This TID 3, that's the Walmart Walgreens TID, which is performing well. And then you can see some expenditures related to TID 4, which includes in section J, that existing debt service, that's for the streetscaping that was done, and maybe some other things, but primarily the streetscaping. The pay-go development payments that have been agreed to in column K, and then column L is the administrative expenses. Typically, it's a pretty common practice that, just based on staff's time to support the TID, that there's an administrative expense. So all these expenses, you can clearly compare columns I to M, that the expenses in column M are exceeding the revenues in column I. So that's where tonight we're going to have a discussion as far as options to try to plateau that. Before we answer questions, Derek, Nate, Brad, anything that you would want to add to that discussion or that presentation?
I would just stress that there are still forward-looking projections in this analysis. So that the very top of the analysis above the dashed line are actual numbers. Everything after that is based on assumptions on what happens in the future. So I'm trying to stay conservative in this planning document. We held that tax rate at the current rate that it is at $24.61. We didn't assume that the rate's going to increase, but we didn't assume it would decrease further. And then there is some future construction growth or new incremental growth that's also penciled in. I just want to point that out.
Great, thanks. Nate, Derek, anything?
No.
Okay. So at this point, I'd be happy to pause if there's any questions or comments before we move to the options. I would be happy to address those.
So if I'm reading this right, so TID 4 expires in 2035.
Yeah, just to clarify, it would expire by 2032. But anytime you have a TID that is in distress, there is some legislation that allows you to extend it a 3-year period. So you can see a light red shade that kind of shows that. So we're already assuming that we would extend it 3 years based on that.
We have already accepted it.
Yeah. Any other questions on that first part?
TID 4 was originally in the extension, so we say it was 19,790.
That's the base value in 2005.
2005.
Yep.
So if we were to, say, if we won a lottery or something like that, how much we'd have to pay out to get out of this?
So, I mean, really in the end, and if I'm speaking out of turn, or if I state this incorrectly, help me out, but I mean, that's where you really want to look at the end number. So right now in the conservative model, you know, at the end, right now we're at about 1.5 million, but, you know, what I'm concerned about when I look at this is kind of in the years of 27, 28, 29. Right now, how we show the deficit, that's exceeding what our general fund reserves are. So when it comes to the audit, or when it comes to, you know, our Moody's rating, that will reflect extremely poorly on the village, where we will not want it to get to that point, because then at that point, not only are we not only financially not compliant with our financial policies, but we don't even have a general fund reserve that can cover the deficit. Any other questions or comments?
So I just generally, I know we haven't gotten to this part yet. How are we looking at potentially another TIF when we have this issue that has to be addressed?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I mean, there could be a lot of pros with another TID, but it all depends on the type of development and the type of increment that it would generate. If the village were to start TID 5, that would generate a lot of increment out of the gates. You know, it could almost act as a help as TID 3 is. Because TID 3, that was a TID that has done very well so far, where it's been able to help support a distressed TID. So you could do a transfer as well to assist. Another thing to keep in mind is TID 2 is expiring in 2 years. For TID 2, we also have an administrative expense that is assisting our general operations. So once that goes away, we lose that revenue for the general fund, where you have to make up it somehow. So if we were to be able to start a new TID and develop some increment on the gates, there would be an administrative charge that could almost replace the TID 2's administrative charge when that expires.
On the flip side, though, Trustee Booker, I will tell you that, you know, there's risk in creating another TID, and the TID underperforms, and then you have an additional anchor kind of weighing you down, while each TID is kind of siloed. You know, these impacts of the cumulative balance, you know, going negative if there's negative development or expenses are exceeding, you know, the incremental value increases, then that's a further problem. But I would tell you, where we're looking to do these TIDs are areas of such huge importance to us that this is our only economic tool, and I think we really need to kind of weigh the risk with that in mind.
And we're also strategically waiting for a project to occur. So by doing that, that's going to allow us, right when it forms, to, you know, see that increment generated right away,
Right.
which will be very helpful. And also, I think it's pretty clear with some of these sites. I mean, it would be hard to imagine, you know, the valuation getting much lower. I mean, we have one site that's undeveloped that, you know, and there's other sites that we've seen just with recent sales that there's been a significant decrease in valuations for what they were bought. So, good question.
So it's really more how to generally act. We're kind of, I don't want to say guaranteed, but this is a risk. But I don't know if we have a lot of alternatives. Before economic development, of the village,
Correct.
but I want to make sure that we have fund banks that solve.
And I do want to mention the good news, I mean, if it wasn't for TID, with TID four, if you just looked at our fund balance, it is healthy. It is really healthy, and that speaks to officials, staff, and managers that in the past have really worked to get that to be a healthy fund balance. If we address TID four and don't need to dip much into the general fund reserves, then it becomes almost an opposite discussion with a question to the board. If you have a fund balance that exceeds our maximum for the general fund balance. So this conversation within the next decade will change, hopefully quite a bit. But to plan for the worst, which is kind of what we're trying to do right now, we need to make sure that we have those step in place to address what may be coming.
But, going forward, 2 years, and I've seen this, when we had to go into the fund balance at the fiscal year. Last year was what, 500,000. We don't know how 22 is going. And my guess is it may happen again.
It will be nowhere near 500,000, but my best guess is expenditures will come right at or actually slightly lower than what was budgeted. But revenue as well, maybe a little more, but it will be nowhere near 500,000 deficit.
Mr. Chair, I have a question. How aggressively are we marketing this area for development? Because we could probably turn it around if we're able to get developers to come in and see this as important safety development.
So I can tell you in our development tours every month, this is where Nate and I start with developers. While yes, the office or the office park or marketplace are great locations, because of where TID 4 is at, this could be a huge help for us. That's another reason why I wanted you to make sure that in the packet, which is our first attachment, you can kind of see what that map looks like. As a municipality, you always have the, there's always also an option of amending the actual district itself. But with the lifespan of the district, I don't know how helpful that would be to do, but I wanted you, at least as a board, to be able to see that location, because this is, it's not just the original village. A lot of times we'll say that because that's a good chunk of it, but you'll see that it stretches down to Tonya, down to Bradley. So there's other opportunities outside of the original village, but yeah, this is where we'll always start our tours with developers, talking through the, potential areas of development based on what we know. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that at all.
Yeah, I would add just a couple of quick points. One is to kind of piggyback off of what Brad mentioned, that the pro forma is very conservative, and I think Trustee Johnson picked up on that in the sense that it doesn't account for any new development. And so that changes that pro forma pretty quickly if we're getting increment. And so we're not assuming that we are going to see anything new there. And I would tell you that the particular map or boundary of the TID as it stands currently does limit us in the sense that there aren't too many spaces within the original village that are still prime for redevelopment. There are more opportunities as you go south along Teutonia. It goes all the way down to Hanson Storage, the 8200 building, kind of that awful medical office building that's long been vacant. As we see that hopefully transition, that will help the TID as the county perhaps reconfigures Sherman and Teutonia intersection. That would free up some land that would be within this TID. And then the other area that we have for development that I see big opportunities for increment is the land immediately adjacent on the southeast and southwest corners of the Browner Road intersection. The village owns that piece. It's the piece of land that kind of extends towards Badger View Park and Killier Court. And then the space where Coco Loco is in the old Brown Hill Garage. So those are some areas that I think there's opportunity for growth and increment in the coming years. And we've definitely, to Tyler's point, we've definitely been pushing that and promoting it.
Is there a possibility, because you talked about extending the TIF, excuse me, going north to pick up the other side of Brown Deer Road, where there's potential for development there? Would that be a possibility?
You could always do that. The problem becomes if there's a new project and if it's a high, like a large project, they're going to want to, both the developer as well as probably the village will want to stretch that over a longer period of time. And so that's where another example of where TID is helpful, because now you can do that over 27 years. While with this TID, we have 12 years remaining. Well, and even for the last few years, you have limited ability, so it's even less than 12.
You can't spend in the last
Yeah.
several years on a TID. But yeah, that's exactly it. That we've contemplated our TID number 5 to be essentially incorporating the north side of Brown Deer Road through the marketplace and then picking up the vacant land behind Bank Mutual for just those reasons, to give us kind of a longer runway to build value. But if there's opportunity that presents itself, maybe some of the things we talked about, the business park, it's possible. If there's the numbers can bear it out, but I think it's probably more realistic to be a new TIF.
Yeah. I think we would still explore pro forma incorporating somehow into TIF just to see how the math worked out. But I would think almost every situation it would work out better in a TIF. But we would still do the math to see what the impact would be.
Is there any major infrastructure that would need to be done on any of these parcels with inside the TIF now?
Well,
That would cost?
do you want to mention with Tonya?
Well, yeah, so the one thing I alluded to was the county is looking at essentially straightening Sherman as it heads north through Bradley Road and the Teutonia intersection. Right now, it has a very large bend. You kind of weave over and meet the angle of Teutonia. They would look to eliminate that and possibly the angle of Teutonia as well. So that would free up, and the county has funding from the federal government through the Recovery Act that they're 100% spending on this project. And so we're working with them currently on the designs. They'll probably be constructed in 2025, Matthew. And so that's a big infrastructure project that will change the lay of the land in this town. Otherwise, the only other infrastructure that would be necessary would be on the kind of private side with stormwater management, and then just utility connections. But I don't see us doing any new roads, any new, major deals beyond that.
Would be the benefit of striking that aside from providing land that could be developed. Why don't we change the course of this?
Yeah, I think that one was,
Oh, really?
that's really it. I mean,
Benefit us?
We have talked with them and about just getting rid of that alignment issue there, and it's safer just to go straight without having to bend
So
around and then
safer.
you're eliminating a cut through. But yeah, the other big reason is for that fact alone is it frees up a bunch of land, and there's county owned land in there that now they would not have to own.
and maintain, and it probably results in a
Savings.
little bit of savings. It's probably less roadway, lineal footage and so on, by straightening it out and perhaps eliminating that Teutonia leg too, so.
So savings over time.
Yep.
Maintenance and.
And just kind of our push to say, look, this is, you kind of over-engineered this. There's a lot of wasted space. Traffic can move pretty simply if we just realign that jog that it's taking, just have it go straight.
And we have a very good advocate at the county who is a village resident on the engineering team and understands all of that.
Former trustee, Well Henning.
So how would that affect us? We gain land and we do that.
Yes.
Correct.
And what would be, how much of a land mass is that?
So, if you know where Farkas Automotive is at currently, essentially, all of the green space that surrounds Farkas, up until the point that Chatonia kind of matches up and is parallel to Sherman.
Yeah.
That's potentially excess land. You know, I'm sure we'd have to work on some of the right of way that they like to retain, but we're talking about probably, Farkas is about, I think, 3/4 of an acre. I would guess that we would probably be looking at an additional 2 to 3 acres of land. It's now, we have our savanna, our kind of prairie savanna projects in some of those spaces.
You're eliminating Savannah.
Yes.
You're gonna tell that.
But so in a community like ours, where we are 98, 99% built out, 2 to 3 acres of additional land is a lot. The Benny, it's a little over 4 acres. It's $39 million in value. It's our most valuable property. So you don't need a lot to get a lot of bang for a buck.
What about that land on Caroline Road that used to be nursery?
Sure, that is currently listed for sale. That's our second biggest developable piece of land, single piece after Algonquin School. And then the Bank Mutual, there's separate lots there, so I don't count that, but that's about 7 acres. It's currently listed for sale. It's zoned single-family residential. My guess is that we might see more of a multifamily proposal there, just given the asking price for the property.
So it's zone agricultural,
It is not zoned single-family residential.
where the nursery is there?
Yep, the land that is farmed behind the nursery or has been farmed.
Said it's 7 acres.
About that, yes.
So if you section it out to what, quarter acre per lot. Quite a few homes.
Not as many as you think, because you have to extend a roadway either into the site or through the site, and you also have to do stormwater management, so you have to build a pond or several ponds, and suddenly, you know, what is 4 homes per acre is gonna drop by probably 30%. So now you really are only talking about, I'd say, 12 to 15 homes at best, is kind of my estimate. And they're asking 1.7 million for the site. So you would have to get a lot for those homes, I think, to make that number work out as single family residential. After, and then that's, you know, with the cost of doing all the utilities, stormwater, so forth.
So are there ideas for this neighborhood we acquired? Or can you talk about, you know, the one that's, the county's gonna take over? Straight down to Tony Unit. So are there any, what kind of plans are there for that to increase, you know, the dollars?
We don't have any firm plans right now. We've not yet even seen the county's proposed design, so we're kind of waiting on that. I think conceptually, as we talk about it with developers, you know, they look at it as probably a mixed use with residential. They look at, you know, perhaps Hanson storage and what could be added on a light industrial basis to Hanson if that were to be eliminated. So those are kind of the two things that we've had discussions with as we've done tours and talked with people in the development community about, but we've not set any designs on paper. simply because we don't know the geometry yet. I think this would assume that the automobile repair was no longer there.
Would that impact the roundabout there?
No, the roundabout would remain. It actually, when the roundabout was built, that freed up some land. If you've noticed, there's a bunch of grass and a few trees in between the roundabout and Farkas. That used to be pavement. And so that's developable land that's just kind of waiting for the second phase.
So if I may go to the options, so part 2 of the discussion, and I laid out 5 options, and I definitely understand there's more than that. But I wanted to kind of explain some thoughts and how we can address TID 4 to plateau and start reversing the deficit. So option 1 is moving the debt payments from TID 4 to the tax levy. So if you look at that attachment B, you'll see in column J there, that existing debt service. So one option is we could move that to the tax levy. That would be an expense then that the TID 4 is no longer observing. And that could be done 1 year, 2 years. You know, the advantage of doing it all in one is that it would stop the deficit from expanding more quickly. But this is where getting the board's feedback on what your appetite would be, because the advantage of spreading it over, you know, 2 or even possibly 3 years is that the impact it would have on the tax levy would be less each year. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. But that's probably one of the actions that would probably have the most impactful effect to reverse the trend for TID 4. Option 2, the other expense that we have some control over is that administrative charge or that administrative expense, which is right around $160,000. So we could take that out. Once again, we could do that over 1 year versus 2 or 3 years. Benefit of doing it all in one, once again, has the most impact on plateauing and reversing the deficit. As a reminder, that's revenue that the general fund uses to support all of our operations. So we would have to keep in mind that that as we're putting together the general fund, if we remove that revenue, now we're already $160,000 short in revenue. I put a note on option 2 that with all the discussion of shared revenue at the state, and that if that comes to fruition, which I remain optimistic it will, the village would be receiving quite a bit of shared revenue increases. So I would say this is a good year to consider that, just knowing that we would get a nice bump in revenue from the state. There's still a lot of details that need to be figured out related to that. Haven't been given a number or any general estimate, but there's the potential that could be a 6-digit number that's just over 100,000. But there's a lot of unknowns, so I would be careful using that number. But just know there's the potential that we could get that increase in revenue.
So is that a one-time or would that be multi-year?
It would be multiple years, but when we put together the budget, when we look at the percentage increase, it would have a one-time impact, because then when you go to the next year, we have that, you know, relatively similar contribution. The other thing that's important to note is based on the current proposal, it's tied to sales tax. So sales tax revenue can fluctuate every year. So I think they would cap it at, it could not be any less than a 95% of what it was the previous year, in case there was a really bad year for sales tax. But there's the potential that, yeah, that could be, you know, if there's a really good year for sales tax, that could be a nice bump for municipalities. Number 3, I kind of mentioned to help the general fund balance, reallocating our ARPA revenue as an incurred loss. So I talked about that a little bit already, but that's one option that I would strongly suggest. Option 4, understanding that, given the situation, we also have to review reducing some village expenses. So bless you. So when a position becomes vacant, from a staff management perspective, sitting down and reviewing, we already do that, but I think we're going to have a different lens when we take a look at a vacancy. Maybe we bring back the vacancy factor, because that's roughly a full position that we could potentially reduce in expenses in our budget, and just knowing that, in some upcoming years, there are going to be retirements and vacancies, that number would probably be seen. So that's one thing. Reviewing benefit expenses when it comes to like the health plan, discussing opt-outs or high deductible options that could potentially lower those expenses. That's something we would review. Another idea is just, talking about our contracts and getting some RFPs out there to see if there's ways that we could maybe do some of our contracts, but at a lower cost. And that would be changing our service standards. So I use the assessor as an example. Right now, we're doing a reevaluation every year. There's a price tag that goes with that. But if you do a reval every 2 or 3 years, it lowers that cost. Well, that's just an example. There's other costs that we can review when it comes to our services, but that's something that certainly I feel needs to be on the table. So there's several things that we can do when it comes to reduce expenses, but I just wanted to let the board know that, that's something that we have to keep in mind. And then lastly, option 5 is reviewing our utility funds and determine if there's the ability to increase those administrative charges. We already have a pretty good administrative charge for each of the utilities, but certainly that could be something that we review. And the other options to consider, I mentioned that, we could certainly borrow from the utility fund balances or borrow more from our GO debt, but just know there's going to be interest with that. And I think anytime that we, can avoid interest payments, I think would be a good idea. So my recommendation is for staff to at least start preparing options 1 through 4, and then we would further investigate option 5. And, I just wanted to get each of the board's feedback on those options. And, especially with option 1 or 2, like we could do that 1 year, we could do that 2, 3 years. It would be helpful to kind of know what the board, how you would feel about, those timeframes and what would be a good expectation for you, so that when we start developing the budget, I can certainly keep that in mind.
So are you looking for each individual trustee's take on this?
Sure, I think that would be very helpful.
Trustee Court?
Under option 4, are you considering reducing staff? Eliminating positions?
The board asked that. I think there's a way that we can get by without doing that. I can tell you in my assessment, there's a number of areas where we are understaffed. I can tell you in the administrative side, just because of, if someone's sick or vacations, we have times that I'm helping at the front desk. So I've never been in a community where the manager's been helping at the front desk, but, I feel that A, I need to pull my weight, but B, there's times that certainly happens. So, on the administrative side, I can't imagine us getting any leaner. I come from a similar municipality. We had a DPW department that was almost double in size compared to here. Now, there's different reasons for that, but that's still, when it comes to snow and winter operations, that's a pretty significant difference. I don't think anyone wants to discuss eliminating police officers. Parks and Recreation, we have 2 staff. Most municipalities our size have 5. So, and they've already been trimmed to begin with. So, as you go through each department, Unfortunately, we're at a point where I don't know where we would recommend to reduce. But, you know, depending on what we consider with service levels, you know, maybe a position looks differently, but I wouldn't go to the point of recommending a reduction to any staff.
Well, I can kick this off. In terms of my perception. I like that options for us to consider. It's pretty considerate. And my question is, why could we not do option 1, 2, and 3? Put those on the table and start looking at that. Recommend option 4. Because I know for a while that there's been a staffing shortage. That's not due to both buildings. That needs to be addressed. So I'll give you recommend 4. 5, throw it on the table and we analyze and see what fits. But I think I like all of it except for the 4. That's my take on it.
I think I would echo what you're saying also. People are, I'm not, I would like to favor the option. But, and see, you know, what the day-to-day operations from the administrative side.
Yeah, one of the areas I think, when we start talking about reducing staff, then you put that burden on other staff. One of the things we're trying to do is retain staff. And so people feel that they're overburdened, and maybe get paid a little bit more on someplace else, doing less work, they're like gonna walk out the door. So I would agree, looking at 1, 2, and 3, and leaving out 4. And once again, what Trustee Brooker said, let's take a look at option 5, somewhere down the road. Trustee Corr?
I think we should consider all options. I don't think option 4 is too severe, you know, it's where there are vacancies, you know, really think about replacing them and if the duties can be spread around. I know we're losing some administrative staff in the police department, which I don't think are being replaced. I think that option 4, we could tread lightly, but still have that in the mix. So I'm in favor of trying it all. Option 4, the way it's described here, is pretty light-handed.
How would we trust the board? I guess what my concern is seeing what we can get back to a neutral position where we're not in the deficit, you know, in the team. So which are, you know, fair it out 1, 2, and 3, where we land, say, within the next couple of years, upcoming years.
Trustee Woods.
Oh, I got talked. I think I'm more in favor of 1, 2, and 3. Looking at 4, if there's something that can be done, but not hitting that as the primary. And then looking at 5 or whatever else is out there that we can do. I mean, hopefully somebody will move in and want to do something and so we don't have to worry about it, but I don't like the idea of big deficit.
Okay. Well, thank you. If I may, oh,
A point of it. Trustee Court mentioned that we were losing a position in the police department, but isn't that position already reallocated for a compliance role?
yeah, we talked about code enforcement.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where in a few months, we'll have that as a presentation for the board on what that will look like. But I think if Trustee Quirk, I don't want to speak for you, I think you mentioned you just won't be in the same role it was. which, yeah, we've talked about that at a previous board meeting, that would be some kind of code enforcement.
There's also the possibility we could have that position grant funded. It's not a guarantee, but there's a CDBG program for Milwaukee County where a lot of other local municipalities use that for their code enforcement.
So if we got that, that could, I mean, that would be a pretty big savings. We know municipalities have gotten 40 to 50,000 to support code enforcement. And if we had a code enforcement position, there probably isn't a need for that to be full time. So if you start doing the math, that could potentially fund the entire position. So
Is that a grant, someone would have to write the grant for that?
annually,
And
yeah. But once received, it's been pretty consistent that you would continue to receive it. But, you know, no grant is ever guaranteed. So that's the one caution. The two follow-up, if I may, attachment E is going to be helpful. Just eliminating the debt service and the administrative expense, you can already see how that plateaus the deficit in attachment E. Once again, we feel there's some, there's some conservative components to how this is put together. So the fact that, we're not forecasting any new increment or, the tax rate, may go up based on evaluations unknown at this point, but there could be some good news there. But the good news is with those two changes, you can see how the deficit also plateaus. And that would be a really good story compared to what we see in attachment B. And then the other point I just want to make, so I asked that question, if you would want to just, put the debt service onto the levy in 1 year or over multiple years. And I don't know if anyone has any strong feelings, but I just want to forewarn that if you do move the debt service to the levy in 1 year, that's already about a 3.5% tax levy increase. And that's without considering operations at all. So that's where it would be helpful if we could just go around one more time just to get that feedback, because you're going to be starting to look then at close to about a 5% levy increase. And I don't know how you as a board would feel about a 5% levy increase. So that's why I wanted to propose the alternative, that if you wanted to do it over 2 years to spread it out more, that could be something that we could do.
And this is just option number one.
Yeah, option one, right, and then we can do the same thing for the administrative charge too. So if you spread it over 2 years, the deficit grows a little bit more, just because you delay it 1 more year. But it would plateau more at about, I don't know, I'm trying to do math on my head right now, like 6.5. So we would still be financially compliant with our policies. But you would see a slight growth of that deficit. And once again, that's reliant on what the tax rate is, what the 8% would be.
Can I say something on that real quick with that admin charge? Tyler mentioned it, but that's kind of a lot also to take off of our general fund. Like, we would be losing 160 if we take away that option for 2. And maybe we get more state aid, but it's no guarantee that we have that revenue just flying out. So we are kind of dependent on it right now. We also mentioned with the other TID that's about to close, it is kind of an issue with us that we do have these admin charges where we're becoming almost as part of our budget here. So if we take out that 160, it's going to help the TID, but it's going to hurt our general fund.
When will we find out about the state money, about the shared revenues?
Wherever the state figures out their budget, I would hope in the next month or so, we would get some more clarification. Yeah.
Can we delay that decision until we have more information?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And like I said, no decision tonight. And that's where, what my goal would probably be is to circle back when we do the CIP, would be a good time to kind of bring this discussion back to you for some additional feedback. But like I said, with everything that's been proposed as of today, I computed, right around 100 or maybe slightly more $1,000 that we would receive in shared revenue. I mean, it's going to be a considerable come out. So that's good news, but,
So if we did the first option, which is we just lose tax every deal with all in 1 year, how much of an increase on average would the property tax totals? I know that it's hard.
yeah, that's a very good question, something we've talked about internally a few times, and that's why I feel the CIP, for that discussion, the CIP is a good checkpoint, because by then, like, we need to know what the assessment will show on the commercial and the residential side. And when we see that breakdown, we'll be able to give you a more distinct answer of how that would impact both groups. But without that information, it's hard to forecast that.
So we really don't need to deal with this tonight. It's
No,
on a place where we
this is a, yep,
test it.
yeah, more of an information for you. I just, you know, it sounds like primarily 1 through 3, still investigate maybe 4 and 5, but I know there's a lot of hesitant or, you know, carefulness with staff, which I appreciate. So, you know, I can certainly, that gives us a good frame to begin our work. And then when we do the checkpoint, you know, you mentioned some information you'd like more to help on that feedback process, which is helpful. But yeah, no, you know, as far as how options 1 and 2, if we do it 1 year versus 2 or 3 years, you know, that'll be some feedback I'll continue to be asking, because we'll need that feedback by June so we can start formulating the budget.
This is really good information.
So with what you guys were just talking about, this could be a good year to do it, is talking to Accurate Appraisal. Our residential is assessed right now, they do like with the assessment amount to the fair market value amount. And we have it about 99%, which means it's very close to fair market value. And for 2022, they had, I'm not sure the reason why this was, but they had our commercial like at low 80s, 82%. So I would expect the commercial to go up this year a little bit, just based on talking to them. I don't know how much higher home values can go. So if we were gonna add debt, this could be a good year to do it. Based on that, people might not notice as much. But there were a lot of phone calls so far this year about why is my house so much? So a lot of people.
Well, I will probably say you were walking. I saw this last tax assessment, property values, the tax bill went up like $30,000.
Right.
And ours went up, what, a couple $100. So I would not see a $1,000 increase for everybody's property tax that we address this together to resolve. But so take a shot at it, but I don't believe we see that value.
It would be 300, I mean, it would be 350,000 for the debt, which would be added on. So we would basically do, that was option 1, you would be levying more property tax money. Yeah.
We're around the table now, right? We can do a 60 day about this.
So that would be a good thing to look at in the future too, though, like how much did the commercial value go up, how much did the residential value go up?
Yeah, we'll incorporate that in our next discussion, so maybe just, you know, keep thinking of that, and then we'll circle back and probably lead you when we have that discussion next.
That's a good argument for spreading it out, as opposed to hitting everybody in 1 year.
Except there's downsides to spread it out. I don't know.
Well, I think what we could do is, you know, if there's interest in spreading it out, we can kind of show from a pro forma perspective of what that would look like over 2 years versus 1. So I know Brad is more than happy to show that. So we'll have that prepared in June when we bring it back.
Okay, so the next item is consider ordinance 23-02, section 14-47.
this might have been almost a consent agenda item, but it's an ordinance, so we have to do a roll call vote. But when we were doing our special events discussion in preparation for the board materials at the last meeting, there was discussion about food trucks. And for the farmers market, there's a different application process for food trucks because they're on site for 5 months and a peddler's permit is for only 30 days. So they would have to fill it out 5 different times. So we wanted to update the ordinance accordingly to. Is there anything else, Karen, you want to say?
No, sums it up.
You define canvasser, this is not political canvasser going door to door, this is. Canvasser.
Yeah, I can look up what it says in our ordinance, but one door to door sounds. Save money.
And person that's selling something. Whereas like, you're getting in. Monetary, exactly, so.
Sure, if you see it's on, let's see, page 84 of the packet, there's, it includes, someone who solicits business from door to door, so it wouldn't be,
Okay.
yeah, so it wouldn't be someone just saying, hey, can you vote for me, or this cause, or join Greenpeace, or whatever that might be. And there's cases, federal cases talking about protections associated with free speech associated with that, which is a different type of solicitations.
And so would this include, so this would exclude religious organizations like Jehovah's Witnesses, et cetera.
Right. Unless they want to sell you a vacuum.
You want to say your religion.
What does this do for the Girl Scouts?
Nothing. They would be, I think they're one of the exempt groups for this permit. So Girl Scouts would not need to get a permit.
They used to.
Down south.
Yes.
There was something in one of the publications, either Bryson or London, that said where the Girl Scouts were going to be having their cookies at this weekend.
Yeah, I think they were having at the big thing. It was all. Yes.
So we need to.
Yeah, if you want to make a motion to approve ordinance 2302.
Okay. I move to adopt ordinance 20-2, an ordinance amending section 14-407 to 14-414 regarding peddlers, canvassers, solicitors, and transient and seasonal merchants.
Is there a second? Oh, we need to do a roll call.
Yes.
Roll call. Trustee Johnson.
Aye.
Trustee Ward.
Aye.
Trustee Townsend.
Aye.
Trustee Owens. Aye. Trustee Woods. Aye. And I vote aye. So motion carries unanimously. Okay, so now we're going to recess in the closed section. Pursuant to Wisconsin statute 19-35 and one Jesus the Father reasons for the legal counsel for the governing body who is rendering all of it advice concerning strategy to be adopted by the body with respect to litigation, which it is or is likely to be coming upon. And that's pursued. Do you want to say it? Yeah, okay, so, is there a motion to move into closed session?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. This is good discussion.
Good to see you. Thanks, Donna. Anyone take a break? Otherwise-
Yeah, we take a break.
But she just gave me the perfect stuff. Oh, cookie thing, so I can just go.
That's how it's like, really, our mine's online and she'll just contact, and I did it last year too, she just contacts me when she's ready. But there's still, I mean, there's still some traditional Girl Scouts, because even after we get cookies, kids still come, girls still come to the house, like, oh, you know, a few weeks. You know, like, oh,
So did you guys have a new raspberry ones?
I don't even remember what I do.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
What happened with her?
Is she trying to join now?
And my grandchildren, and everybody just comes over to cookies, because my son has. It's gross. We just, because we've always did, because my oldest granddaughter used to sell them.
We should just have IT at that.
I think we were
But it's-
24.
They weren't familiar with Star Wars yet, but
But we put them in the freezer.
Yeah, they keep really well.
no.